I was going to caveat to everything is the roll casting,
Okay.
because that's quite literally why it has two handles.
Mm-hmm.
Because
To leverage.
essentially you have leverage,
Mm-hmm.
but your leverage comes from your bottom hand, not your top.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're single hand casting and you're roll casting all day, that's one hand that's taking all of the stress from the entire day of fishing.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas when you have this, you can roll cast. I mean, and that's a total switch rod application. That's not exactly a spey rod application.
Mm-hmm.
But that's where switch rods come in extremely handy, because you have two hands to use instead of one, and that makes your roll casting so much easier, because you can actually utilize the power that you have instead of getting tired and wanting to go home.
One thing about the switch rod, basically the switch rod is the little brother or the cousin of the spey rod.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically the same rod, just in a smaller application. Usually they're 10.5 feet to 11 feet long. 11 feet's about the maximum they'll go. The grips are just a little smaller, and again, just great for getting to where you want to go. Now, one thing I did want to mention, there's a new phenomena, and it's funny how this is all changed.
Absolutely.
3 years ago, our number one selling spey rod by far was a 14-foot 9-weight.
Mm-hmm.
Now they've come back, and now it's about a 13-foot 7 or 8-weight, and I noticed that's what you have here, Steve, is
Absolutely.
a 13-foot 7-weight. Fly lines have changed too. 3 years ago, all we sold were reel wind cutters with multi-tips. There wasn't a lot of choices out there.
There wasn't.
Pretty much it was that. Well, now you have the Skagit short, you have the Skagit belly, you've got the... So what I want to talk about is, because this is going to be educational for me, is what is the difference between, say, a reel wind cutter and a reel Skagit?
Well, see, a Rio wind cutter and a Rio Skagit, you have a whole, they're both whole lines.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it's just basically a style of casting. The wind cutter is heavier in the tip.
Okay.
So that carries your line out there further. It's heavier, excuse me, I shouldn't say it's heavier, it's more dense in the tip, but it's smaller in diameter.
Mm-hmm.
So the wind isn't going to grab that tip and swing it straight up or downstream.
I see.
And the Rio Skagit is meant strictly for Skagit applications. It's thicker to the head of the tip and in the middle, and then it tapers down.
Real
at the
small
end.
running line.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's one thing I do notice is when we sell this product, I always take a look at it, or when we're spooling it online, and I did notice the differences,
Mm-hmm.
and it seemed like that running line started sooner
Absolutely.
and was much smaller. And I know it has taken the industry by storm, because that's all we sell. The real wind cutters are virtually non-existent in the seller's market anymore.
Mm-hmm.
We just do not get any demand
Absolutely.
for it. And one thing too, I want to talk a little bit about reels.
Okay.
As we're coming up with this as we go, so I think of that. Now, one thing you have to remember when purchasing a reel to go spey fishing is we're talking about line capacity. Isn't that right?
Well, line capacity and weight.
Mm-hmm.
For a 13-foot rod, you're going to need in between 11.5 ounces to 12.5 ounces to make that rod balance in your hand.
That is such a great point that you make.
So a 13-foot 6-inch rod would take the Hatch 9 Plus perfectly.
Mm-hmm.
This reel is a little bit big for this rod, but for a 13-foot 6-inch 8-weight or a 13-foot 4-inch 8-weight, that's the perfect reel to have.
Steve, I'm glad you mentioned that, because as you know, a lot of people who are in the fly fishing business, the Ross Momentum came out about 3 years ago. Shortly after it came out, in fact, within the year, Ross decided to come out with a Momentum LT, standing for light.
Yes.
So they did away with the old Momentum. They said it was too heavy.
And people want the old one back.
People want the old one back. People who are spey fishing, I've had people call me, do you have this? And by the way, I do have 4 of them coming. We were able to pick up from a gentleman in New York.
Yeah.
They want the heavier reel.
Absolutely.
And it's the same thing they said. My customer told me, who called me, he's on a waiting list, by the way. He says, we want the heavier reel to balance out my rod. It is just too light. In fact, he was telling me he's going to take his butt off and add lead to his butt section of his rod so he can get that weight.
That's what Echo started doing with their switch rods.
Yeah, well, I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah.
And I know personally, Hatch, Nautilus, it just balanced out right.
Absolutely.
I think not to knock Ross, but I think they missed it a little bit. They went more towards the guys who are saltwater fishing
Sure.
with single-handed rods, and they forgot about
Absolutely.
the Spey guys.
Just like my go-to Spey reels, I have a Ross Canyon Big Game number 5
There you go.
for this rod, which evens that out perfectly.
Right.
And then for my 14-foot 9 weight, well, I have a lot more Spey rods than that because I'm a rod building addict. But for my 14-foot 9 weight, I have a Ross Canyon Big Game number 7.
Oh, nice.
And both of those reels are the correct weight to make that rod feel comfortable in your hands.
Right.
One thing a lot of people don't want to cast a Spey rod versus a single hand rod is because they're worried about the weight. That's another thing is they're thinking a heavy, long rod. They're not going to be able to manage their line because the rod is too long. They're not going to be able to mend. That's simply not true. It's a fallacy. You're using both hands. And if your rod is balanced correctly, it's going to be a pleasure to fish with all day long.
Right. You know, one thing, again, Steve brings out a great point here, is I noticed when the Spey phenomena really started going, it was shortly after we opened this store. Steve, I've never seen a Spey rod. And a gentleman brought it in and he put it together. I go, my goodness, what's that all about? Well, next thing I know is more and more people were requesting Spey blanks and Spey rods and Spey reels and lines. And I noticed there were older folks.
Absolutely.
And you know what they would all tell me is the same problem I'm having. They said it bothers them all day to do that single-handed casting.
Absolutely.
Roll casting is a lot less stress on your body. Everything's in front of you. It's a much more gentle stroke, and you can get it out there. Of course, when I do that, don't think I know what I'm doing. I don't, but that's why we have Steve
Me
here.
either. I don't know what I'm doing.
But that's what they all told me. And I mean, that's one thing I noticed. In fact, Steve is kind of the exception. What's happened now is, as it's become more and more popular, the younger guys are picking this up and they're saying, hey, you know what, that looks like something I want to do. And it's all a progression. Like I said, you start out with that spinning rod, you get that bait casting rod, then you go into fly fishing, and then your equipment gets better and better. And then you see that guy out there using that switch rod. You say, I want to try that. And then you see that guy using that Spey rod. And it's the same way with building a rod. One thing I think is great, Steve, is that Steve builds the rod he wants to use the way he wants to use it. And as soon as I looked at this rod and saw, for instance, he put this synthetic cork on here, this rubberized cork, I felt, well, you know, that's great to grab onto. And your hand doesn't slip on it.
Especially when it's cold.
Exactly. And you know what? He was thinking about that. And yeah, so if you have any questions about Spey fishing, we do have a number of guys here at the shop that do Spey fishing. They can answer your question. And if we have to get a hold of Steve, I'll get a hold of Steve, have him call you. I don't give his number out publicly because it'd be ringing all the time.
Well, that's not expensive.
Yeah, he's expensive. So give us a call here at 454-8188, area code 208, or check us out on the web, and we'll talk Spey, or we'll just talk fishing, whatever you want to do. Now, this is what we call Spey 101. We didn't cover everything. And if you do have any questions, don't hesitate to call. Steve,
Absolutely.
Thank you very much for coming
problem,
by.
sir.
And take care, and we'll see you later.
Alrighty.
We're done.
Cool.
Woo-hoo. That came out good.
That was actually a good little 20.